Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into Rules of the Dead, exploring Philadelphia's absolute most haunted sites through a really fascinating pop culture lens. We're going to connect true historical horrors from the city's cobblestone streets with ancient supernatural legends that span the entire globe. It is basically a journey into how the rules of the living eventually become the rules of the dead.
So, let's kick things off with a question to set the stage for everything we're about to uncover. What is the #1 rule of surviving a horror movie? I mean, think about it for a second. Don't go into the basement, right? Don't split up. Definitely don't read the Latin text out loud. The supernatural terrors we fear most actually follow a very strict set of rules. And the thing is, if you're smart enough to stick to them, you just might survive.
You know, there's a great line from the movie Trick or Treat. All these traditions, jack-o'-lanterns, putting on costumes, handing out treats, they were started to protect us. But nowadays, no one really cares. That perfectly hits on a core theme we see in folklore across the world. The traditions and rules we follow, they are often the exact things keeping us safe from whatever goes bump in the night. These rituals aren't just for fun, they're literal survival mechanisms.
Which brings us to a very real narrative trope. Horror hates a rule breaker. This establishes that surviving the supernatural demands strict adherence to rules that honestly are sometimes completely absurd or just plain unfair. And it doesn't matter if you didn't know the rules or if you accidentally broke them because your car broke down on the wrong backwater road. The monsters are bound by these rules, and they are more than happy to punish anyone who breaks them.
Just look at how global folklore severely punishes rule breakers. Like if you meet fairies, you must never say thank you or eat their food. In Japanese urban legends, if the spirit Akamanto offers you red or blue paper, you absolutely have to refuse both to survive. And in Iranian folklore, if you cross paths with the Mardasme in the woods, you cannot show an ounce of fear. Stare it down, and it leaves you alone. We're going to use this exact framework of rules and punishments to analyze Philadelphia's haunted past.
Now, apply all of that to Philadelphia, and things get genuinely unsettling. Ghosts are often defined as souls stuck in limbo because of some unfinished business or a broken rule. And in a town with as much heavy history as Philly, we're talking a city of originators, revolutionaries, and some pretty infamous characters. It is bound to have way more than its fair share of lingering souls drifting through a world they just don't belong in anymore.
It's a wild contrast, actually. When you walk through the city today, what do you see? Tourists, historic bells, incredibly cute colonial houses, people grabbing a quick lunch in the park. But what lies beneath all of that is a staggering history of violence, pain, and massive hidden graves. You might think you're just enjoying a nice sunny afternoon, but you're literally walking right on top of a very dark history. To put that into perspective for a second, 5,000. That is the number of unexhumed bodies buried in mass graves directly beneath Washington Square Park. People are out there listening to the birds chirp, chatting with friends, right over 5,000 forgotten bodies. It really proves that the horror and the potential for disturbed spirits is quite literally right under our feet. Let's move on to our first specific location. Take Elfreth's Alley, for instance. Founded way back in 1703, this is America's oldest continuously inhabited residential street. Today, it is this picture-perfect cobblestone vision with beautiful colonial facades. But it hides a bloody secret behind that quaint exterior, stemming from a time when the ultimate rules, the rules of war, were broken.
Picture this. It's October 1777. The British are brutally occupying the city. Suddenly, a thick, mysterious, and blinding mist completely envelops Philadelphia. It was so dense that soldiers literally reported losing sight of the person standing right next to them. For some, it was just weird weather. For others, a dark omen. But in reality, it acted as the perfect eerie cover for anyone daring enough to break the rules of war by passing secrets in the fog.
And that brings us to the ultimate punishment for espionage. According to local legend, a young British soldier was caught passing info to the Americans. He was swiftly tried and hanged right there on Elfreth's Alley. Because he broke the rules, he's forever cursed to patrol those same cobblestones. People today still report seeing a figure in full uniform with a musket, or catching the quick shimmer of brass buttons before he just fades back into the morning haze.
All right, let's fast forward a bit to 1829 and explore our second case study, Eastern State Penitentiary. If folklore is all about supernatural rules, Eastern State was about human rules taken to a totally torturous new extreme. This imposing stone fortress was basically designed to enforce discipline through an experimental and deeply controversial system. 23. That's the staggering number of hours per day that prisoners were forced into absolute silent isolation. Think about that. They had only a single skylight for illumination. No working together, no exercising with others. It was a punishing rule of pure solitude. And rather than actually reforming anyone, it was designed in a way that practically broke the human mind.
So, what happens when you inevitably break these impossible rules? Well, the human wardens here essentially became the monsters of our folklore. The punishments were brutal. We're talking ice baths, where prisoners were then chained to freezing exterior walls until the water turned to ice on their skin. There was the infamous mad chair, which strapped inmates down so tightly it cut off their circulation. And even outside their cells, they had to wear total silencing masks, just to ensure the absolute rule of quiet was never, ever broken.
You can literally track the buildup of negative energy and madness over the decades. It opens in 1829 as this grand social experiment, right? But the cruelty is so intense that by 1913, the entire solitary system has to be completely abandoned. By 1961, all that tension explodes into a massive inmate riot. Finally, in 1971, this massive fortress of suffering is officially closed and abandoned for good. You can only imagine the sheer volume of tortured energy left behind in a place like that.
Given all that history, is it really any surprise that today, cell blocks 4 and 12 are absolute hotbeds for paranormal activity? The souls punished by those brutal rules seem completely trapped there. Visitors and maintenance workers constantly report intensely negative feelings, shadowy figures darting across the walls, and, most terrifyingly, loud, disembodied voices and cackling laughter echoing down the long stone halls of cell block 12.
Now we have to talk about a slightly lighter but still pretty dark twist. Inmate C2559, better known as Pep, the Black Labrador. He is, without a doubt, Eastern State's most unique rule breaker, and his story is this perfect blend of spooky folklore and bizarre history. The folklore here is just wild. The myth claims Pep was sentenced to life without parole back in 1924 for the heinous crime of murdering the Pennsylvania governor's cat. The reality? He was actually just brought in as a therapy dog to boost morale. But the prison leaned into the joke so hard that this very good boy got an official mugshot and his very own inmate number, making him a permanent fixture of the prison's lore. And the crazy part? Tourists and ghost hunters still report running into Pep today. They hear him happily prancing through the empty corridors, his dog tags jangling away, and sometimes they even hear his phantom howls. Even in the afterlife, Pep is out there breaking the absolute strictest rule of Eastern State Penitentiary, the rule of total silence. But Pep definitely wasn't the only famous name in there. Back in 1929, the infamous Chicago mobster Al Capone did some time at Eastern State. Now, Capone was granted all sorts of special privileges, a writing desk, oil paintings, his own personal radio. He essentially broke the prison's own rules of equality and suffering that applied to every single other inmate. But as the horror trope warns us, you cannot escape the rules of the supernatural.
Despite his luxury setup, Capone couldn't buy his way out of the ultimate rules of horror. Fellow inmates reported hearing this feared mob boss screaming in his cell at night, desperately yelling, "Leave me alone." He was actually begging the ghost of James Clark, a guy he'd murdered in the St. Valentine's Day massacre, to stop tormenting him. Capone thought his money and status made him exempt from the rules, but the lingering souls of his victims made absolutely sure he paid the price.
So what is the big takeaway from all of this? Whether we're talking about the ancient rules of supernatural folklore, the strict codes of military espionage on a foggy colonial street, or the brutal, maddening regulations of a 19th century prison, breaking the rules always demands a terrible price. And that price is very often exacted by the lingering souls left behind in the very spaces we walk through every single day. Which leaves us with a pretty unnerving thought for today. As you go about your life, walking over unmarked graves in a sunny park, ignoring old traditions, or stepping into historic buildings, you really have to ask yourself, are you unwittingly breaking supernatural rules you don't even know exist? And if you are, who or what might be waiting to punish you?